Some people believe it's history, some believe it's myth. Either way is fine, we're gonna talk about it. For those of you unaware, the 10 plagues of Egypt comes from the book of Exodus in the Old Testament, or the Torah for you Jewish folks, and were caused because the Pharaoh refused to let the Hebrews leave Egypt. So, to sway the Pharaoh's opinion, plagues were brought upon the land, and those plagues were... The first plague was water to blood. The waters of the Nile River were turned to blood, or at least they were turned red to appear as blood. They became undrinkable, and it killed all the fish and other animals that lived along the river. The second plague was frogs. The land was inundated with frogs, like an avalanche of frogs. There were frogs everywhere, so many frogs. Frogs. And then, the third plague, which was lice and or gnats. Yeah, then came lice and or gnats, as in all the dust of Egypt became lice and or gnats. Fun fact, I used to have a Bible that actually misprinted the word gnats as gants. True story. Another fun fact, the tactile sensation that something is crawling on you is known as formication. So, long story short, there's lice everywhere. The fourth plague, wild animals or flies. Now, more likely than not, this meant horse flies, seeing as they could cause pain to humans and livestock, which was the point. I hate horse flies. It could actually mean wild animals that just came and attacked people and livestock, but it's not particularly clear on it. And the fifth plague was sickness of livestock. Yep, as if constantly being bitten by horse flies and or being constantly attacked by wild beasts wasn't quite bad enough, all the livestock got sick and died. The sixth plague, boils. Kinda self-explanatory, the Egyptians and their animals, which if the livestock was pretty much dead, would mean that it would be their pets, so you know, dogs and cats, were stricken with painful boils all over their bodies. The seventh plague, the raining of hail and fire, or the thunderstorms of hail and fire, the worst hailstorm Egypt has ever seen with lightning and fire supposedly thrown in. This destroyed much of the crops, and what was left, well, the eighth plague was locusts. Yeah, what was left of the crops were eaten by the swarms of locusts that descended upon the fields. So, no crops, no livestock, but hey, at least they've got the sunlight. Except the ninth plague was 3 days of darkness. Well, yeah, never mind. It says Moses reached his hand to the skies and the sun was blotted from the sky for 3 days. When all this didn't work, we got to the final plague. And that final 10th plague was the death of the firstborn Egyptian sons. The Hebrews were instructed to paint lamb's blood around the outside door frames of their homes so that their houses would be passed over. That's where the holiday name comes from, and only the Egyptian firstborn sons would die. Also, people tend to say it was the angel of death that did the actual deed. However, that name is never used. Rather, the angel in charge of the deaths is known as the destroyer or the destroying angel. This might have been a nod to Azrael or Samael, but we're not sure. Also, angels are described as looking a lot different than people tend to think. As an example, the destroyer is described in some texts as having 4 faces, 4,000 wings, 70,000 feet, and his whole body consisted of eyes and tongues whose number corresponded with the number of men on the earth. Yeah, there's a reason the first thing an angel typically said to someone they appeared to was, "Don't be afraid," because these things look terrifying. But was any of this actually possible? Well, possibly yes. It is possible that some things along these lines did happen, just not exactly how the story goes. The most likely explanation, other than it simply being made up, is the Minoan eruption, which was a massive volcanic eruption that occurred at Thera, now known as Santorini, sometime around 1600 BC and wiped out the Minoan civilization. A common misconception is that the volcano was on the island, but no, the volcano was the island. Considered one of the largest volcanic eruptions in recorded history, the first being Tambora, but we've talked about its eruption and subsequent year without a summer before, cheap plug, and we are pretty sure that Egypt experienced some major fallout from the eruption. But you may be wondering, how the hell does a volcanic eruption cause the 10 plagues? Well, let's go in order here. First, the river turned red because of all the debris shot out into the air coming back down to the ground, more specifically sulfur, possibly iron, and more importantly, cinnabar. That's right, cinnabar, the single most toxic material that we know of, which would have turned the Nile red, killed all the fish, and made the water unusable. And with the water tainted, life forms that would normally live in or around the water but couldn't anymore, like frogs, went onto land looking for a new home. And all the dead fish and riverside animals would have brought in a crap ton of gnats and lice, which would have laid eggs in the carcasses, and this would also explain the flies. And if it was wild beasts instead of flies, well, pretty sure all this stuff going on would have driven them insane, plus you had all these dead animals around the Nile River, so yeah, it's not like there was a lack of things to eat. All the stuff in the air falling to the ground would have contaminated what the livestock ate, hence why they all got sick, and the subsequent acid rain, which we do have historical reports of terrible storms that hit Egypt around this time, would have caused burns or boils. I'm doing air quotes here, you can't see them, but I'm doing them. And that would explain the burning hail that wiped out the crops. With so many crops being wiped out everywhere, well, locusts are gonna swarm when they need food, and all those dead things along the Nile brought them in like a dinner bell. And, of course, the volcanic ash was so thick that it blocked out the sun for several days, hence the 3 days of darkness. But what about that 10th plague? How did a volcano kill off all the firstborn sons? Well, there's two possible explanations here. One, that the grain became poisoned, and because the firstborn male was often fed first and the most, they would have ingested more of the toxins and therefore been more likely to die. The second possibility is much darker, and that's the idea that the firstborn were killed as sacrifices to unappeasable gods to make all the strange occurrences stop. Now, the ancient Egyptians did practice human sacrifice, but the latest evidence we have of it happening was the Second Dynasty, which was a good 1,000 years before when we're talking, so it's doubtful that this one's true. There is supposedly an account of dead children of the aristocracy in the streets, but this may have been part of an uprising. Honestly, we don't know for sure what the context of that account was. And there's also a theory that it was all caused by red algae, therefore Egypt was cursed by a crimson tide. Yeah, I guess they know how Auburn feels.